Hello everybody and welcome to my ultimate endgame build for Lune. This build is going to be an absolutely insane build which is going to allow you to do millions of damage every single time. Without further ado, let's get into this guide and discuss what everything is all about. So if you don't already know how Lune works, I will link in the description below a guide to my previous video about Lune which will discuss in more detail how her stain mechanics work and how her different elemental attacks generates these stains. This week's going to be solely discussing how to get this build as you see it in this video. So let's start things off with looking at her skills. Now the first skill we're going to be having here is Hull. That's not that important, that's just there in case you come across an enemy that may be immune to certain elements. That's going to be just there as a backup essentially. Then we're going to be having Rebirth, which is going to be quite valuable because it's going to actually generate you a light stain. The reason why light stains are quite nice is because light stains count as any color, so they count as fire, electric, ice or earth depending which one you need. So it's a neutral stain which is very valuable. But the two most important skills on our skill tree here is going to be Elemental Trick and Elemental Genesis. That is pretty much what this build is going to be revolving around, and I'll discuss in more detail how that operates here. So with Elemental Trick, what you're going to be doing here is you're going to deal low single target ice, fire, lightning and earth damage for 4 hits, and if you get critical hits on any of those hits, you will generate a corresponding stain. Now the important takeaway here is that only critical hits are going to generate those stains, so you need to make sure that your build has a lot of luck pumped into it. You want to make sure that your critical hit rate is going to be as close to 100% as possible to make sure that you're able to get that critical hit with every single shot, because you're going to need those stains to cast the next skill, which is going to be Elemental Genesis. Now Elemental Genesis is going to deal extreme damage to all enemies, and it's going to hit 8 times, so each hit is going to do extreme damage. But the problem is you can only cast Elemental Genesis if you have exactly 1 ice, 1 fire, 1 electric and 1 earth stain accumulated. So that's why it's very important to have Elemental Trick, and that's why it's also very important to have a very high crit rate. So how it's going to work is you're going to cast your Elemental Trick first, and then you're going to cast Elemental Genesis. Now we also have a Picto which we'll discuss a little bit later on, which is going to allow you to do 2 attacks every single turn, which means in the same turn you can cast Elemental Trick for 3 AP, then Elemental Genesis for 4 AP, and that's only going to consume 7 AP, which you're already going to start off with 9, and then because of our weapon we're going to be able to regenerate all that AP that we just used, and every single turn you're going to be able to cast this again and again and again, which means every single turn you're essentially going to play Elemental Trick, Elemental Genesis, Elemental Trick, Elemental Genesis for millions of damage every single time. It's absolutely insane. This is going to melt every enemy you see, bosses, everything. Very powerful build. We also make use of Lightning Dance. Not that important, it's just there as a backup. Maybe there's an enemy that's immune to certain elements, that's when it becomes a problem. That's when you're going to need to use the backups. And then we have Typhoon, which is going to be there for utility, as it is going to heal allies, and it's also going to generate you a light stain. So in the rare situation that you need a neutral stain, you can utilize that, but the healing of this is obviously going to be quite valuable, since healing is always going to be quite a nice asset to have. Now how this build is going to come together is going to be regarding the weapon and the Pictos. Let's discuss what those do, because the weapon itself is going to be the Trebuchem, which is going to generate a random stain on free aim shots. Be careful with this, because if you've generated all the correct stains and then you start using free aim shots, it might overwrite those stains with some that you don't want, which could mess up the Elemental Genesis. So be careful with the order in which you use that. However, when you get to level 10, that's when it becomes very interesting, because at level 10, when you get this weapon there, it's going to get +1 AP when stains are consumed. And because you're going to be consuming 4 stains every single turn, what this essentially means is pretty much every turn you're going to get +4 stains when you cast your Elemental Genesis. So you're never going to run out of AP, and you're going to be able to infinitely cast Genesis every single turn due to this weapon, which makes this build absolutely insane. Then moving on to the Pictos, we're going to have a couple of things going on here. Now this is where it becomes very important for the crit rate, because you can't really get your crit rate all the way to 100, reasonably speaking. You know, you can only level up your luck so much before it becomes a little bit excessive, and that's where your Pictos are going to come in handy. Now Pictos are going to be broken up into 2 categories. You're going to get the perk and you're going to get the stats. Now we're off the stats here. We're not really interested in the perks. You can put the perks on as Luminous, which we'll discuss later on, but what you want to do is you want to look for Pictos that are going to have high crit rate. One of the nice ones I did end up finding was the base shield one. This one also is a very nice perk. You can find this Picto by completing the trials in the Chosen Path arena, and this is going to reward you with this Picto. It's a bit difficult to do, so you're probably going to be at the higher level to do this. It's not crucial for the build, but it definitely does help. The perk is actually very nice. If you don't have this, you can just put any other Picto that you have. This is going to generate you 1 shield every time it's the start of your turn if you don't have a shield. So you're pretty much going to get 1 free hit that you can tank from all enemies every single turn, which is very valuable. Not crucial for the build. Again, we're after the crit rate here specifically, but it is a nice to have. Then weakness gain, we don't really care about this picture, we're just there for the stats. It's a high crit rate stat of mine, and it also comes with some nice speed, but you're gonna get +1 AP on hitting the enemy weak point once per turn. Not that important, the perk, but 17% crit rate, that's why it's there. That's gonna allow us to get our crit rate close to 100%. Then we're also gonna have Burning Death, and this is going to give you another big 32% critical rate. Once again, the perk here is not very valuable. Apply 3 burn on all enemies on death, not crucial. However, the fact that it has 32% crit rate is massive, and that's gonna help us get close to 100%. You don't have to be at 100%. Obviously, if you're like 85+%, it's still gonna work. It'll be less consistent. Obviously, if you're at 100%, it'll be 100% consistent. You know, if it's 95%, it's probably gonna work most of the time, and that should be good enough. So you wanna try push it as high as you can towards 100% if you can help it. One other aspect about the weapon, which is quite important to mention, is that it does have scaling with vitality and luck. And the reason why luck is so important is because of the fact that we're gonna be leveling up our luck a lot in this build. So having extra luck stats is going to make our weapon do also more damage, because we're leveling up our luck anyway in this build for the critical rate. So having a weapon that scales with luck, obviously very, very valuable for this build. Then let's take a look at our luminers and what they're all doing and why I decided to put them all. I'll discuss which ones are crucial, which ones aren't that important, and then how you're going to get some of these if you don't have them potentially. So in terms of our pictures, we're going to be making use of At Death's Door. Now At Death's Door is going to give us 50% more damage if health is below 10%. This one isn't going to be very crucial because you're not going to that often get below 10% of health unless you make use of other characters or other abilities to get here. So it's just a nice to have. It's not crucial. You can cut this one if you're short on Lumina points. It's not at all needed. This is one of the lesser important ones. We also make use of Augmented Counter. This one's going to do 25% increased damage on counter attacks. Also not very important. You can definitely cut this one if you are tight on Lumina points. We're also making use of Cheetah. This one is going to be very important. However, this build can function without Cheetah. It will require you to have to make use of her ability cycle once every 2 turns rather than every single turn, of course. You will unlock the Cheetah picture once you are able to defeat Sprong. It's going to be a giant metallic rock-like monster in the middle of the ocean, and when you defeat him, you will be getting this Cheetah picture. This is one of the best pictures in the entire game, actually one of the best items in the entire game, so I'd recommend getting this as quickly as you possibly can. It is going to require you to get to a certain level in the game. Like, it's not a particularly easy boss to defeat. It has I think a couple of million HP, so it's definitely going to take a while, but once you get that, it is going to make this build so much better. Very, very valuable if you can get it. Dodge, I just think Dodge is a very well statted Lumina. Only costs 1 and gives you +1 AP when you get a perfect dodge once per turn, so it's just nice to have. Definitely would recommend taking that one. I'd also make use of Energizing Start 1, 2, 3, 4, and also Energizing Turn, because you are going to need obviously quite a few energy every turn to make sure you can do this attack every single turn. So that's why we do have enough energy generation through the Energizing Starts. We're also making use of Full Strength. This one's going to give you 25% increased damage when you are full of health, and that's going to be very nice for the early game, especially when you do have full HP, so you just get a nice stat bonus there. Not crucial to have, of course. This is just another nice to have. Most of these damage bonuses, you know, you're going to put as many as you can on, depending on how much Lumina points you have available. If you don't have enough, obviously you put a bit less of them. So just essentially, the higher you level up this build, the more damage you're going to do, because the more Lumina points you're going to have, and the more you're going to be able to equip of these Lumina points that are going to give you extra damage. But they're not all necessary. Obviously, if you don't have enough, you can cut 1 or 2 of them, whichever one you prefer. We're also making use of Glass Cannon. Our Glass Cannon is going to allow us to do 25% more damage, but you're also going to take 25% more damage. But considering how much damage you're outputting here, I don't think it really matters that much how much damage you take, because enemies aren't really going to have a turn to fight back most times. So just having more damage is going to help make that possible. We're also making use of Healing Tint, which is going to give +1 AP when healing is applied. Just another little nice to have. It's not very crucial at all. This one is very negligible. Just had 1 AP available to spend, so I put on that. We're also making use of Immaculate. Now, Immaculate is going to be obtained once you progress the story enough. So this one's going to give us 30% increased damage until we're damaged ourselves. So it's again going to be a very early game focus thing. It's going to give us more damage in the early game, but it is going to be another 30% increase of damage. I'm not going to tell you exactly where to get it because of any spoiler related things, but essentially once you get past a certain point in Act 2, you will get this from a main story boss. So just continue to complete the main story and you'll unlock that. Inverted Affinity is going to allow us to apply Inverted on self for 3 turns. What that means is you won't be able to heal for 3 turns, but you'll be able to get 50% increased damage while inverted. So for 3 turns, you're going to be doing a whole lot more damage. And once again, these numbers just scale more and more and more and becomes quite ridiculous once you put enough of these stats on. We're also making use of Painted Power. This one's going to be quite important for this build in the late game, but you can still make use of it surprisingly enough. Even before you get Painted Power, you will still be able to do potentially 80,000 damage with this build, even without Painted Power. Now, Painted Power is another one that's going to be unlocked through progressing the main story. At the end of chapter 2, you will unlock this. So I would recommend obviously continuing your playthrough to unlock this. Roulette's going to be a bit of a weird one. It's going to give us every hit is going to do 50% chance of either doing 50% damage or 200% damage. So overall, you're going to do more damage in the grand scheme of things, but it's going to be, you know, it's going to add a little bit of luck involved, but mathematically speaking, you're going to be doing more damage overall. So we have Roulette on for, again, more damage. SOS Shells is there to help with the survivability. This is going to give us 50% more HP. We're also making use of Solo Fight, which is going to deal 50% more damage when fighting alone. Again, that one's not very crucial at all. You definitely can get rid of this one, but it's only going to cost 1 AP, so I thought, why not put it on? And then Warming Up is going to be quite nice because it's going to give us 5% increased damage per turn, can stack up to 5 times. You're going to be able to unlock this from defeating the Grosse Tate boss, which you're going to be able to see on the continent map. It is going to be another relatively higher level boss, so a bit difficult to unlock that one, but definitely worthwhile once you do end up getting it. So let's take a look now at the attributes. Now, the first and most important attribute here is going to actually be luck. And the reason why luck is so important is because leveling up luck does 2 things. It's going to level up your critical rate, and you need that critical rate to be as close to 100% as possible. And it's also going to scale your weapon's damage. So when you level up luck, you're going to do more damage as well. So it's going to be a very valuable stat line in this build. Another important one is going to be vitality, because again, vitality also scales the damage, and you obviously do need Lune not to just die in one hit. So getting her at least over 2,000 health is going to be quite helpful. I like to aim for like 2.5 to 3,000 HP, but it's a little bit difficult with this build because it's slightly on the glass cannon side. So I currently have it at 2,200 HP. If you level up past this point, obviously you can upgrade that further and get it maybe close to 3,000, but anything over 2,000 should still be okay. Obviously, more damage is always nice, so we have our might leveled up a little bit to 21. I would also like to level this up a little bit more, but unfortunately, it is going to be limited in terms of the fact that luck has kind of prioritized most of my attribute points. Agility is just there to make sure that enemies don't kind of take too many turns. You want to make sure you have a little bit of agility, because if you don't, enemies are going to be able to go multiple turns against you, which you don't want. And then defense is on the smaller numbers here. We do have a lot of defense when it comes to shields and shells, so I don't think it's that crucial, especially if you can avoid getting hit, and you don't really need this that much. Again, it's a bit of a glass cannon build, but I think for the most part, my Lune was able to survive enough that she was able to get her attacks through quite frequently. So obviously, the most important things in this build is going to be Elemental Trick and Elemental Genesis, as the build will not be able to function without that. You're also going to really want to have the Trebuchet weapon. That's going to be quite important as well. And the next most important thing you're going to need is you're going to need to get your critical rate to as close to 100% as possible. I don't think I would recommend playing this build unless you have at least 85% crit rate. Anything under 85%, you're not going to be able to consistently cast your stains, and that's going to cause things to be just very clunky. It's also going to be quite important to note that certain enemies might have immunities against certain elements. It doesn't happen very frequently. I would say only 1 out of maybe 15 or 20 enemies this is going to be a problem, but every now and then you do see an enemy that's going to be immune to certain elements, and if that does end up happening, when you cast Elemental Trick, you won't get a stain for that element. So if there's an enemy that's, let's say, immune to fire, and you cast Elemental Trick, you will not be generating a fire stain. That means you're going to have to try and generate those stains elsewhere, such as using things like Hull, or maybe if it's immune to Ice, you'll have to cast Typhoon to generate that, and that's going to be up to how you get the stain. It's going to make it a bit more clunky. Luckily, it's not very common that you see that, so I wouldn't worry about it too much, but if it does happen, just rely on other skills as well, such as Hull, or maybe something else like Lightning Dance that will do some damage otherwise. But anyway, that is going to be the build guide for Lune. Beyond this point, I think all you can really do is just level up your character further, just increase some numbers and increase stats. I don't really think this can get much better in terms of the build. It is very, very powerful, and it's going to make going through endgame bosses and enemies pretty much a breeze. There's a few bosses that are still going to be a bit of a challenge, obviously, because they're very high level, but otherwise, this build is going to just demolish absolutely everything that you see in your path. Very, very powerful build, and this is going to be the ultimate endgame Lune build you can come across. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any other crazy builds that you are trying out, any other characters that you want to share, and I'll see you guys again next time. Take care, everyone, and bye-bye.